In last week's episode, we took a tour of the Czech Republic's historic state-owned brewery, Budvar. While exploring their freezing cellars, we came across a 7.5% Pilsner brewed with fresh green Saaz hops that has quickly become one of our favourite beers ever.
That's what lager's about.
We loved it so much that we went back for multiple pours, but never quite got the hang of it.
Nailed it.
This week we're fixing that, but before then, we go back to the brew house to have an in-depth chat with Adam Broz, the century-old brewery's 10th brewmaster, about what it's like to be responsible for one of the world's most iconic beers and what goes into making it.
So Adam, I understand you've been at Budvar for a long time. When did you join the company?
Oh, I've been working for Budvar for 24 years. It means that I came after my graduation from the university in 1999.
Wow, so your first job out of university straight into here. And what was your first job here?
That's right. My first job here was right here in the brew house. I was a chief of the brew house. It took for about 3.5 years to be skilled enough as a chief of the brew house.
Right.
Then I became a technologist. After that, the deputy brewmaster. And finally, in 2009, I became the 10th brewmaster of Budvar.
Wow. And are you from this town originally?
Yes, I was born in Budvar.
Right, so it must be amazing to have grown up around the brewery and knowing the brand and the beers, and then to be the person responsible for those beers.
Having to confirm, because it's a kind of dream job.
Right, and there are lots of people in the town that would have loved that job as well.
Yeah, that's right.
So what does a brewmaster do in a brewery that obviously has so much history and has a beer that's effectively been the same for a long time?
I think that the strongest thing is to keep the taste the same in case of the traditional recipes, traditional brands like Budvar is. Mm-hmm. So I feel to be strong in the keeping the protection, keeping the line in the long term, to have the best ingredients, to keep the process which has its strong reason why to do it in this way, and to keep the taste excellent in of case of the beer.
So I guess because the ingredients change slightly year on year, you're making small adjustments to ensure that it is how everyone knows it.
That's challenging. I love it because if you are a brewer, you are working with the live stuff from the beginning till the end. From the barley on the fields, the hops on the fields, the yeast, the people, and at the end, the live human being again.
Yeah.
It's a judge of your work.
Yeah, and we've talked to a lot of brewers who talk about the yeast almost like another member of the company, because it's been. What's the history of the yeast at Budvar?
Yeah, I think that to perceive the yeast as an employee of the company is the right attitude, because we have been using the same yeast strain since the beginning of the brewery. It means since 1895, the same yeast strain is helping us to produce an excellent beer.
Mm-hmm. And because the character, you sell the yeast to other breweries and stuff, it's got a really strong, quite fruity character, especially when we were tasting it in the tanks.
Definitely, not only yeast, but all the ingredients formates the final taste profile, but especially our yeast is fermenting quite deep. It means that you get the high or deeper fermented beer with 5 ABV finally, and with the specific taste, very clean in its taste profile.
Yeah, I mean that's what I think really sets Budvar apart from the other of the bigger Czech lagers, which is this lovely dryness and fresh, subtle kind of aromas of apple and things like this that really add complexity to what is quite a simple recipe, effectively.
It is, and it's clear from the beginning with the philosophy, because we are using only the pale malt at very high quality from the Moravian fields. Then the finest aroma hops, the fine Saaz aroma hops. It's a kind of hop that you can't mask any off-taste in the beer by the hopping and by the malt as well. And if you add the yeast and the water, which is very important, and in case of water, we have our own sources of water, 300-meter deep artesian wells with very soft water without any microbiological fault. So if you combine all these 3 ingredients and you employ the yeast, then you can get the smooth taste profile like Budvar is.
And has Budvar Original, has that been there since 1895? Like that recipe has always been?
Yes, the recipe is original. They are the same ingredients because they were always available in the Czech Republic. So what I love in case of this brewery is the pureness of the Czech things, again from the beginning to the end.
Yeah, right to the end. Yeah, but you have added new beers even quite recently to the lineup. So you've got one that we've been drinking and enjoying, the 33. What was the thinking behind that? It must be quite big for Budvar to release a new beer, particularly a pale lager.
What remained, we are specialized for lagers because all the equipment and all of us, we are set up for lagers because I think that the lager is the most universal drink for the everyday life, for every occasion. You can drink it only if you are thirsty. You can drink it if you are celebrating anything. So it's really universal, and I love lager for these purposes. So everything is set up for lagers, but the lager, it's not a boring category. And that's the reason why we are trying another recipes like Budvar 33, which is a bit more bitter, but again with very noble bitterness made by the variety Agnus, again from the Zása area where it is grown. And we are combining different malts in this recipe. In case of 33, especially the Crystal Light from the UK.
Right.
So it was really a challenge to combine a piece of the ingredient which comes from abroad with the typical Czech ingredients. And
was that the first time you'd used sort of a non-Czech ingredient in a lager?
Yeah, right. It is so. All the beers before, like for example the dark lager, they are all only from the Czech ingredients.
Right. Wow. So we've been having some conversations with quite a few Budvar lovers while we've been over, and some of them have said that what's kind of interesting about Budvar is it's not like a typical Czech lager. When we think of Czech lagers, maybe they wouldn't be quite as dry and they'd maybe be a bit more bitter. And the 33 is even though it's got an English ingredient, it's a slightly more Czech beer profile.
Yeah, it's always very difficult discussion what the typical Czech lager is, because in case of Budvar, perhaps we can feel the influence of Munich style beers. If you go geographically from Munich through Budweis to the Austria, you can meet some beers with very mild bitterness, not low bitterness, but at the medium intensity, but with very mild character. So I think that's the influence of the Bavarian style, of the Munich
the
style.
Helles kind of.
Yeah, the Helles, definitely. And it's mixing in the Czech Republic with the influence from the north part of the Europe, where there are preferences for more bitter beers, bitter lagers. If you go for example, in Germany, if you go to the north, you can get the beers with very rough, strong bitterness. And I think that in the Czech Republic, it's a mixture of these different influences.
Yeah, because I guess sort of the Bohemian area and Bavarian areas, historically they're very closely linked, and there weren't necessarily borders there for a long time. And so it must have been, it wasn't two pale lagers that sprung up independently. Helles and Pilsner were essentially being invented at similar times.
Yes, I think that's the same origin, same roots, and what's different, it's really the philosophy of the strong players at each brewery.
Yeah. Well, I've got one final question. So we've talked about the brand new, the 33 lager, but when we were down in the cellars, we were tasting all kinds of exciting things that were just sort of tucked away, just tanks in the middle of the fields of Budvar Original. Yeah. Like we had a wet hopped reserve and some other like hops like must, which I've never tasted before. Is that just the brewers having fun and trying to learn more about beer, or is there a plan for these incredible, unusual beers?
At first, yes, it's really for joy, because we always want to test the ingredients. And if you have mentioned the wet hopping, it's a really great thing to compare the crops between, in case of fine aromatase hops. But nowadays, in case of Agnus variety, and what is more, we are testing some brand new varieties which are breeded in the Saar area. So it's really exciting, and
so you're just excited about new Czech varieties.
The answer for the first question is yes. It's really for joy, and there are some samples. I call it extra commercium. They are not being sold. It's really only to check the varieties, to check the recipes. But on the other hand, I have to admit that if something interesting will be there, and something interesting for the market and for the brewers and for the fans, for the beer geeks, it will be sometimes showed and sold.
Well, I mean, that green hop reserve was just absolutely stunning, and I will admit we went back to the tank a couple of times, so if that tank's a little bit lower than it was when you last went down, I apologize. And I mean, I would come to Budvar every year for that wet hop beer, so I hope that one maybe is brewed again.
We were amazed how dynamic the process of maturation at 2 degrees centigrade could be. If you let it mature for 400 days, each week you get different taste.
Wow.
It's really exciting thing, and that's the reason why we are testing.
So you're saying I should come back every week, not just once a year when the wet hops are...
Of course.
Right, every week.
Of course.
Talking about beer in a hot brewery is thirsty work, so after a quick refresher back in the cellars, we headed up to the on-site bar where Budvar Brewery trains tapsters to pour their beer correctly. There, Radim gave Brad a masterclass in pouring lager properly. Or at least better than he was before.
Bradley, you're not milking a cow, what are you?
Hello. Hello, dark one.
Brad, we've got 2 pours here. One of them looks kind of sad for itself. The other one looks delicious, but what are we sort of testing right now?
Yes, so Brad, now we are testing basically the taste test for you. So we got 2 types of pours, basically. One of them poured traditionally, as you would expect in the pubs. One of them poured the Czech way.
Okay.
The only thing I want you to taste is the difference.
I'm already regretting tasting this before I taste it. That looks very sad for itself.
So that would be probably the traditional pint that you get to taste. I'm going to encourage you, take a proper sip, like it's Friday afternoon and you had a really hard day at work.
It's kind of harsh. It tastes kind of harsh. It's like quite bitter.
So over here,
yeah.
So this beer has 5 grams of CO2 per liter. What that means, there's 5 of these glasses of CO2 fitted in. Yeah, so that's all the amount of CO2 that your body needs to process. Yeah, so basically, if I pour it this way, it will be highly carbonated. So you spend the time by processing the gas. So you get burping much and just be, that's what you want to, because you want your thirst quencher, right? You want to enjoy beer, you want to have a first pint, second pint, third pint. So this one would have higher content of CO2 and will cause that little pressure over here, the burping.
Okay.
So now we're having the Czech pour. It obviously already settled, the foam. So we always try for those 3 fingers of foam.
Yeah.
But because we actually, by using those steps that we use in Czech Republic, we decarbonate some of those CO2 out of the beer. Yeah, so the foam on the top will protect the beer for longer, so the beer stays fresher for longer.
Yeah.
But also it brings up the texture of the beer. Yeah, so the foam is your friend, not the enemy.
It's creamier. Radim, why is it? It's creamier. It's softer. There's a maltiness to it, which I don't get in that sad-looking
and
beer
then just reducing the amount of CO2 in the beer.
So there's less CO2 in the beer, despite there being a sort of pillowy blanket over the top of it. There's less CO2 in the beer. It's less harsh. The flavor's less harsh.
And it brings up all the flavors. It brings up the harmony between the maltiness and bitterness.
Why would anyone ever pour it this way?
So this is the misconception in market, in the pubs, where you don't get trained how to pour a pint. You just basically take the glass off the shelf, you pour the beer. You might even know how to do that, but you basically just pouring pint like you see everyone else doing.
Yeah. So there's like no training involved. It's literally just opening the tap.
Correct.
And see how it goes.
Exactly.
Right. Can you show me the two ways of pouring these? Because this is like night and day. This is so different. I can't believe this came out the same tap, same liquid.
It's very simple. It's very simple. So you always start with your glass to be chilled at the same temperature as the beer. You always want to match the temperature of your beer to your glass. It's basically a reason for that. You have stable head on the top of the beer, but also the beer stays colder, hence fresher for longer. Yeah. It's just like when you're having your steak. You never serve hot steak on a cold plate, so you should never be serving cold beer in a warm glass. So we always starting with the glass being chilled. You can either chill it in the fridge or in an ice well. So if it's in the fridge, the next step is basically just to rinse the glass. Yeah, making sure there's no residue in the glass.
Nice.
So we always let a little bit of beer, pour it away, and we go all the way to the bottom, a couple of seconds. We open it fully. So what we do is basically first we're creating the foam, which is the protective layer for the beer. So the beer is not exposed to oxygen.
Yes.
And will not start to lose the flavor. And then we take the spout and put it underneath the foam. So basically the beer has never been exposed to oxygen.
Right, so the spout is always underneath the foam.
Exactly.
Right.
So after that, you keep pouring it out. So you would end up with a Czech pour with the 3 fingers of foam.
It's beautiful. It's finger beauty, mate.
It's a finger beauty, right? But in the Budvar, we've got Budvar connoisseur, we got a specific pour to actually amplify the flavor of Budvar, and it's called a 2-step pour.
I'm here for it. Let's see it.
We're starting the same way, where still chill the glass, we rinse it, making sure there's no residue of water.
Yeah.
And then we're starting with opening the tap just a little bit, all the way to the bottom, and open it fully. So we're creating the foam again.
So it's kind of the same at this point.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And then once we get the 2/3, we stop it, we take it away, and you can see we've got 2 fingers of beer, 2 fingers of foam, and two fingers of light.
Thirds, yeah.
So now we let it set for 30 seconds. What happened in those 30 seconds is that the CO2 starts to escape, but also the protein, which forms the head, thickens up, so it's more stable. So basically the cap that keeps the flavor inside of the beer stays there for longer. We got 30 seconds in, we go all the way in and just open it fully. And then keep on all the way to the top. And we stop, don't let it drip back. And there's one very signature thing, you will always have 2 bubbles or 3 bubbles on the top that tells you that's the 2-step pour. But you're still having those beautiful 3 fingers foam on the top. So comparing to the 1-step pour, in the 2-step pour you get a much less of that CO2. So it brings up even more drinkability of the beer.
I love it. Can I drink it?
Please, na zdraví.
Come on, na zdraví. I mean, it doesn't get much better than that. This I thought was spectacularly good. So it's just elevated, man. You're an artist.
Thank you. Na zdraví.
Na zdraví.
Oh, that's all right.
Sad? It's 2.5 fingers. You said 3. Come on.
You see this man's fingers open?
Yeah, that's true.
Sadly, our time in the beautiful town of České Budějovice was coming to an end, but there was one last chance for a quick bit of Wet Hot Reserve and a final Budvar original poured to perfection by Brad himself.
All right, mate.
That's impressive, Bradley. You've learned so much.
I've literally never learned anything on any beer trip ever. But this, my God, I can do a Czech pour.
There we go. Na zdraví.
Na zdraví.
So there was a moment in the cellars, sadly I didn't have the camera running, where our lovely tour guide just leaned into your ear and gently said, "We can die now."
Yeah, which I thought was a bit terrifying.
Right.
But I get his sentiment. He's like, it doesn't get any better than this,
Yeah,
right?
we've peaked.
Beer has peaked.
We have peaked.
We've peaked in a cave. Well, not a cave, but
We're on the ground floor, yeah.
We're on the ground floor.
Yeah, very cold ground
in a
floor.
very cold 2-degree cellar.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
It was an absolute privilege to be in that place, to be able to have, we were given like the pet, they call it, the keys to the city.
Yeah.
We were going around tasting the incredible beers, as fresh as they could possibly be. Some of them lagered for months and months, well, obviously 3 months even for the original. And just the beer does not taste better than a lager straight from a lagering tank, mostly in the Czech Republic.
But like Adam was telling us about, and Radim and everyone was telling us about all the experimentation they do here. They've got, beers that have been in tank for 410 days. That was the maximum they wanted to push
That's as far as they've got, yeah.
That's crazy. That's a crazy amount of time, right?
I think something I really learned on this trip through Budvar is that when we talk about like a brewery that's full of beer geeks, we expect them to be releasing different beers every week and all this kind of stuff. But you can be a real geek about, the 10, 15 beers you brew a year, or just one beer. Seeing Adam's eyes light up when you asked the right question during our interview with him about his beer, about the original, was very exciting to see, and the little, marginal gains they've made to ensure that it remains the beer that it is in everybody's heads. Because I'm never going to think of Budvar in the same way now. It's a different beer in my head.
He's got a childlike wonder about what he's doing. He's literally got his dream job.
Yeah, he was a child
say that
wanted
in
it.
life,
Yeah, true. Well, maybe us.
Maybe us.
Maybe us. Yeah, and one of the best beers I've had ever, I think, was that Wet Hop SARS Reserve. Was just strawberry jam on croissant with like a lovely clean fresh bitterness and kind of apple skin and other freshness brought into it. It was just stunning. I didn't expect to be stunned. I thought I'd just be drinking really delicious beer poured right. We'll get to that in a second. But I was actually floored by how good some of the beers in that cellar were.
Yeah, and it's sort of like brewing for the pure, simple joy of brewing as well. Like a lot of this stuff is experimentation. It won't necessarily see the light of day to sort of mainstream audience, but it's all about innovating and trying to make those marginal gains and understanding the different hop varieties that they could bring. Even sort of some British malts were thrown around in some of those tanks and stuff. It's very exciting. I did like you. I didn't necessarily expect to have my mind slightly turned around coming here.
Yeah.
But this is another historic brewery, which I think is massively innovative.
Yeah. Yeah, we seem to be visiting those kind of breweries. We all think that these older breweries don't move as quickly as they do. I mean, they're doing trials that were lasting 5 years, but when you're working on a scale as long as Budvar are, that's not a long time.
No.
But the other big takeaway for me from Budvar has been the pause, because I think it's something that everybody should learn from. That not enough weight and importance is given upon the point of serve, because you can have these delicious beers and then you can mess it up at the last minute. And to see Radim pouring it properly, and in all the pubs and bars that we've been to while we've been here, to see that perfect sort of 3-finger head delivery that just means that every sip is moosey from the start to the finish. I wish there's so many great lager brewers in the UK. I wish all of them were pouring it that way. Their beers would be elevated, and we use that word a lot with Radim. Yeah,
it's something that we're lacking in the UK, I think, and it's an education thing, right? So the more we kind of get this message out there that serving lager is like, you need to really treat it like an art form.
Yeah.
And you need to respect the glassware, the temperature it's at. It's all about the kind of viscosity of the foam and everything, creating like a pillow that protects the liquid underneath it.
Never fear the foam.
Never fear the foam.
Don't fear
it's all
the
beautiful.
Foam. Yeah.
I love it.
Foam is beer.
Yeah.
And I'm mostly beer at this point. It's been one of those trips.
Yeah.
And absolutely mind-blowing. I cannot recommend coming, like particularly to visit the cellars of Budvar is an incredible experience. So if you're headed, to Prague or to one of these sort of big tourist locations, you've got to make that trip south to Budweis and to revel in the history and the beer and the freezing cold cellars. Na zdraví.
Zdraví.